Member for Pascoe Vale.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to support the Summary Offences Amendment Nazi Salute Prohibition Bill of 2023. This is a bill that fulfils the Victorian Government's commitment to legislate a ban of the Nazi salute by prohibiting the public display or performance of any symbol or gesture used by the Nazi Party or its paramilitary arms. In doing so, I note that this bill has bipartisan support, which I commend and I acknowledge, particularly through the quite profound contributions that have been made from all sides of the House thus far. Because we are at our very best as a parliament when we can unite around such important and meaningful issues on behalf of our diverse and multicultural state. In saying that, Deputy Speaker, I still honestly find it very hard to fathom that we here in Victoria in 2023 and that we are still fighting and pushing back against evil Nazi ideology following some of the most recent and disturbing incidents across this state. Because, Deputy Speaker, along with our allies, valiant Australian men and women fought to defeat Nazi Germany during World War II from 1939 to 1945, a war that ended 80 years ago almost. Yet here we are in the Victorian Parliament today in 2023 having to continue that fight to ensure that we never again even come close as a community to repeating the grave mistakes of the past, or even permitting evil ideologies that should be consigned to the past to have any place in today's modern Victoria. And that all begins with recognising, calling out, stamping out and outlawing, if necessary, any signs of overt racist and bigoted behaviour that incites hate and violence espoused by however many few people as early as possible before it has any chance to take root or to take hold again. And that all starts with words, it all starts with symbols, it all starts with actions. That is why remembering and understanding and learning from history, however positive or negative, is fundamental to helping us all on the journey to build a better and more inclusive future, which is what we're all here to do. It is also fundamental to helping us understand the ideology that some in our community today still sadly continue to follow, preach, salute or be influenced by, which has led us to moving this bill. So, Deputy Speaker, let us delve into a little bit exactly what these neo-Nazis in modern-day Victoria are actually saluting. Deputy Speaker, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party, was the radical far-right movement and political party led by Adolf Hitler, who along with his henchmen would go on to become the leaders of the biggest ever mass murderers in modern human history. First founded in 1920, the Nazi Party originally attracted very little popular support. As I understand, they were actually initially treated almost like a joke. However, under the banner of Nazi flags, symbols and the Nazi salute, the Nazis went on to build an ultra-nationalist narrative that weaponised the impacts of the Great Depression from 1929, the effects of the treaties of Versailles, which Germany signed following the end of World War I, as well as the gradual and staged targeting of faith, cultural minority communities, namely the Jewish community, whom the Nazis increasingly and falsely blamed for the failures and shortcomings of the German state. Economic and social distress across Germany, the Nazis' growing ideology went largely unchecked as they continued to spread their propaganda, misinformation and fear way before the days of social media, spruiking themselves as the solution to solving Germany's problems. In just 12 to 13 years, the Nazi Party managed to go from being a fringe political movement in 1920 all the way to being democratically elected as the largest political party in the German Reichstag by 1932, with Adolf Hitler going on to be appointed as Chancellor of Germany in 1933. The rise to power made possible through the democratic process provided the Nazis with the legitimacy they sought to implement their hateful and murderous policies, including via the 25-point program that Hitler first envisaged way back in 1920. As National Socialists, the Nazis sought to claim to unify German people through their complete obedience to the state. They called for the state to lead a master race, and I quote, in the racial struggle against inferior races. The Nazis' plan sought to supposedly unite all the German blood with their program calling for the acquisition of new lands and denying citizenship rights to all non-Germans, particularly Jewish community. This Nazi ideology would go on to become the tragic foundations of some of the most unimaginable and unspeakable acts of cruelty ever administered on humankind, and was also an ideology that turned otherwise everyday, normal and well-educated Germans into complicit murderers and accomplices to the Nazis' regime and agenda. However, it sadly wasn't until the morning of August 31st in 1939 that the West began to stand up and push back against Nazism, with Hitler's action to invade Poland sparking the commencement of the Second World War. Deputy Speaker, on September 3rd, 1939, Australian Prime Minister Sir Robert Menzies announced the beginning of Australia's involvement in the Second World War on every national and commercial radio station in the country. Almost 1 million Australians, both men and women, answered the call and would go on to serve and fight in the Second World War. Of these, 205,700 Victorians enlisted to serve, which equated to 10.7% of the state's population at the time, the highest population percentage contribution of any Australian state towards the war effort. They fought in numerous campaigns directly against the Nazis, their evil ideology and the Axis allies on the seas, in the air and on the land, including in theatres across North Africa and Europe. By the end of the war, almost 30,000 Australians lost their lives, with tens of thousands more returning with physical, mental and emotional injuries that lasted a lifetime. Alongside the Minister for Veterans in this place, I would like to say thank you and pay tribute to the service of all the Australian men and women who fought in World War II against the Nazis, particularly those who served from Melbourne's northern suburbs and who continue to be remembered through the work of the Shrine of Remembrance and locally for me via the Coburg RSL, Pascoe Vale RSL and Coburg Historical Society. When modern wannabe neo-Nazis stand on the steps of Parliament and salute the Nazis, it's an affront to the service and memory of Australian veterans who sacrificed so much. However, the full scale of lives lost and the horror of the war would not become fully apparent until the end of formal hostilities in Europe, which German High Command authorising the signing of an unconditional surrender on all fronts taking effect as of midnight over the 8th and 9th of May 1945. Provoked by Nazi Germany, World War II tragically went on to become the most deadliest and destructive war in human history, claiming between 40 and 50 million lives overall. Today, this is the equivalent of populations of either South Korea or Spain being entirely wiped out in today's terms, both of which respectively equate to 50 million people. The war also tragically displaced tens of billions of people, created unprecedented trauma that has continued to be handed down the generations to today. In this regard, the Nazi policy of forced extermination of people supposedly of inferior races or creeds and political opponents led to the murder of at least 11 million people of various minority groups, as the member for Mumboldt pointed out yesterday. At least 6 million of these people murdered by the Nazis were from European Jewish communities. Profound horror. And at least 1.5 million of these, as the member for Caulfield actually pointed out yesterday, were children. Deputy Speaker, one of these children sadly was ultimately Anne Frank, who was tragically a well-known victim of the Holocaust, who kept a diary of her experiences as her family hid for their lives in a secret Nazi-occupied home in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, which I had the privilege to visit in 2013. The extermination of minority groups by the Nazis commenced from 1933 to 1945, with Nazi Germany and its allies establishing more than 44,000 camps and other incarceration sites, including ghettos across Europe. The Nazi perpetrators used these locations for various purposes, including the detention of people deemed to be enemies of the state, forced labour and mass murder, either via mass shootings, gas chambers and other incomprehensible methods of human suffering. In 2013, my wife and I also visited one of these sites, the Dachau concentration camp just outside of Munich in Germany, which was an incredibly moving and life-changing experience for me. Established in March 1933, Dachau was actually the first regular concentration camp established by the then new Nazi government, originally designated just for political prisoners. Dachau would go on to sadly become the model for all later concentration camps and also serve as the training centre for the SS concentration camp guards. The number of prisoners incarcerated at Dachau over this time would exceed 200,000 people, with researchers believing that around 40,000 people at least were killed. And like the millions who sadly would go on to march through the gates of the Nazi network of future concentration camps, the prisoners at Dachau were some of the first, tragically, to march under the Nazi slogan of Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free. Speaker, I recently had the pleasure to read Eddie Jaco's Happiest Man Alive book over the winter-July break, and with the time left, I'd like to try and leave us on a more positive note, if I could just get to his quote here, which I have, which I don't think I will now, but look, I really commend this bill to the House. It's all about standing up to these neo-Nazis and supporting our multicultural, diverse community of Victoria.